talk.
Yeah, me too. So, I mean, let's just not waste any time. Let's just jump into it. Our first topic of today is Pro Football Focus. They released their preseason all conference teams this past week. And Arizona, surprisingly, had a lot of names to it. It had 7 to be exact, 8 if you want to include linebacker Colin Schooler, who entered the transfer portal not too long ago. I'll run you through the list right now. You have quarterback Grant Gunnell and running back Gary Brightwell named to the second team. You've got center Josh McCauley and cornerback Lorenzo Burns, as well as corner Christian Roland Wallace named to the third team, and wide receiver Jamari Joyner and offensive lineman Robert Kungle named as an honorable mention. So, I mean, just to kind of put that into perspective, Athlon Sports also released their preseason all-conference team, and they only had 5 Arizona players. So, I mean, so Pro Football Focus, you could argue, is the more highly regarded media outlet, giving more praise to Arizona and also ranking Arizona players higher as well. Athlon Sports didn't have any Arizona players in its second team. Pro Football Focus had 2. So, I mean, with all that being said, Ryan, I mean, is there a chance that Arizona has a few bright spots on this team and could potentially exceed their expectations this year?
Absolutely not. I believe that this team is gonna hit a downfall, losing the Schooler brothers, Tony Fields, and after all this stuff with COVID-19, forcing the players not to practice as much, and the season being pushed back, and not knowing when they will play again this year.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to note that the majority of the players named to these teams were all offensive players, right? I mean, look, even if this offense ends up being pretty good and better than it was last year, the defense is still going to be a mess next season. I mean, we saw this exact situation play out last year for the Wildcats, where there was a productive offense and it was just being held back by the defense. And I mean, say what you want about Arizona's offense last season. We all remember watching it, as dysfunctional as it may have looked, and all those painful 3-and-outs to open up the games. I mean, say what you want, but the Wildcats still finished top 3 in total passing yards, rushing yards, and receiving yards in the Pac-12. They averaged 440 yards per game, which was good enough for third in the Pac-12. So, I mean, say what you want, but the offense pulled its weight last season, as bad as it may have looked.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just the reality was the downfall of this team this last year was the defense. And, I mean, I understand that there was a lot going against them last year. I mean, you had Marcel Yates being fired midway through the season. They had to battle a bunch of injuries as well. But, I mean, there were just so many times where they just gave up so many points. I mean, 56 points to Oregon State at home last season is inexcusable. 45 points to Hawaii in the opening week. You just can't do that. So,
yeah, I 100% agree with that. Like, their offense, I do strongly believe that if they had a decent defense last year, I think they could have competed for the Pac-12 championship. Their offense at some points looked like unstoppable. Like, even the first half of the Washington game at home, they looked great, and then the downfall proceeded to happen after halftime with their defense not coming through. Like, these teams, like, they're not going to get outplayed that much with their offensive play, because even last year with Khalil Tate, and now even their quarterback could be better with Grant Gunnell, some could say, could provide a different style of quarterback play with senior Gary Brightwell. Hopefully he can take a bigger approach in the backfield and lead this team.
Yeah, and I will say this. I know we rag on the defense a lot, but I mean, part of their reason why they were so bad last year was the special teams. I mean, I don't think anybody wants to talk about how terrible Arizona special teams were last season, but they were dreadful. I mean, just punts were being shanked left and right. And even when, you had a good punt, the return team the defense team would give up a 40-yard return, and they would just have, insane field position to start. So, I mean, the defense was on its back foot to start for most of the time. And, the offense turned the ball over in its own half a lot last season. So, I mean, to their credit, they did have a lot going against them, but I mean, they still could not get off the field when it mattered most. And I really think even if this offense ends up being good or even better than it was last year, the defense and the special units is just going to hold it back next season.
And something that's a key point to that, yeah, and something that's a key point to that is the defense has a lot of young players that are trying to grow, and as the coach said, it's Kevin Sumlin said it's going to be tough for these players to be integrated into the offense when they're trying to learn while coming in and out with the precautions that they're observing. Like it's very tough. Like for a young team like Arizona right now, to if they continue playing later in the year, to have a good season and maybe better than expected.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. It even there's a lot of youth on this team, and all the veterans are on their way out, right? They lost Colin Schooler, they lost Scotty Young Jr., they lost Tony Fields. I mean, just the veterans are out the door, and they kind of left all the kids to kind of fend for themselves. So, I mean, what is Arizona's biggest weakness, do you think? I mean, I guess we kind of already talked about the defense, but I mean, what specifically on the defensive side do you think is really going to hold them back next season?
I think it's the linebacker position and the cornerback position. And next year, and especially years following, because a few of those guys you named on that Pro Football Focus list are on their a lot of those guys were juniors and seniors, and they're not young players. And that's gonna set us back and Arizona back years in the future, because it's hard to get these guys playing times. And before they canceled the season, Arizona's schedule was very tough. Like they had some very hard games playing USC at home. Then they were playing Cal, Oregon at home too. Like those aren't easy matchups anywhere.
Yeah, I don't see them exceeding expectations just simply because of that linebacker core and as well as their safeties in general. I mean, I think their corners are pretty solid. I think Lorenzo Burns and Christian Roland Wallace are two pretty solid corners. I think Christian Roland Wallace had kind of struggled his freshman year, but I think that was just because he was targeted a lot, playing alongside Jace Whitaker and Lorenzo Burns. You know, he was the baby to pick on, so I think a lot of people threw to him, and I think it was more volume as to why he was getting burnt a lot more. So I think we'll see him kind of make a big jump this season. But the safety division, I think, is really thin. We already talked about Scotty Young Jr. Departing from the team. He was third in total tackles. So now Arizona lost their top three tacklers on the defense. So I just don't know where that production is going to come from next season. And we talked about it last week about filling the linebacker core with safeties, but Arizona can't do that. They don't have the safety core to do that as well. So they're just incredibly thin.
And also, even if they try to do that, it's going to be very, very hard for guys to switch in and out of positions, like not knowing when they have playing time. Like that's just very, very hard for players to deal with. And I don't believe that they're gonna do well transferring to that.
No, I agree. I think a lot of them don't really fit the build or like the size of a linebacker. It's one thing to kind of be, like in the right mindset to play inside linebacker, but you got to be big too, right? I mean, you're going to be playing in between the D tackles and all them. So I don't think Arizona has those guys, not only to necessarily, fill the role and just play it, but also, like be as big as them, and be a linebacker. So I really, it's going to be a lot of plug and play next season for the defense. And even if the offense is good, I just don't see this defense or special teams carrying the workload.
Yeah, I believe that. I